Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to The Solution. Nothing changes if we change nothing. We're so excited to be back here today and see you again. Hey, Chevar, how's it going?
It's going good. The only thing that I'm sad about is so gloomy outside right now.
Yes, I
When I look
know.
out the window, it's like, what is going on? Is this supposed to be summer?
Did it rain where you are?
It did rain. It rained earlier this morning, and I didn't know it was going to rain because again, I have not been watching the news or the weather. But I don't go outside, so it doesn't make sense for me to watch the weather. But yeah, it rained this morning, and but it's just gloomy outside. I'm not a big gloom person, but I'm a photographer, and overcast is the best time to shoot photography.
Well, then you may need to go out.
Exactly. Maybe I'll do that later this afternoon.
But one doesn't need to go out to be involved in the weather. If I recall 2 weeks ago, when we were having a hurricane, a few or three, um, you needed to know that for sure, being inside.
Oh no, my windows rattled. The trees shook. I was like, "What is going on? Are we in the monsoon or something?" It was freaking me out. So, but I didn't have to go outside to know that.
Yeah, and just so people know, you may hear some sounds when we're recording. Shavar's up in Harlem, and you're going to hear the street sounds. I'm out on Long Island, but you may hear the dog sounds. But when I turn around to look, it's because my one of my dogs is misbehaving. But hopefully that won't happen. But we like to keep it real.
Oh, definitely. And I love the sounds of the city. I live in between the hospital and the Metro North, so I don't sleep well.
Well, as you know, I grew up in Queens, and I lived in a lot of different areas of Queens. And I had I rented a house actually. I was in a band called Three Penny Opera, that was six women, and I lived with two of the women in the band. We were the ones who were the founders, and we were the main part of the band. We were Three Penny Opera, and it was awful, but we lived right across the street from the Long Island Expressway. Above us was the subway, I think, or the Long Island Railroad. There were train tracks, and we were in the paths for the JFK planes. So it was kind of loud there.
The planes, that sound loud. I just want really quickly because you mentioned this band to me before, the Three
Yeah,
Penny Opera. You mentioned it, but you didn't tell me how you guys got the name. Can you share with us how you got the name?
sure. I have to give you a little history first of the band. Now we're talking so many years ago that some of our listeners and viewers probably weren't even born yet. But in the late '70s, I formed a band with a bunch of people, and out of the group, three of us, Susan, Gail, and Ronnie, emerged, and we were trying to come up with something to call our trio, and we started going through names that had the word three in them. And I remembered the Three Penny Opera, which was actually a famous play. And we said, yeah, that's a great name. But we put an E in the penny, and we called ourselves 3PO. And, and
Um,
we and we gained popularity during the urban cowboy country music days in New York City. And during those times, there were so many bars around and clubs. There was the Lone Star, City Limits. These were really big clubs. And we were a six-piece, all-female country band. We had country rock, and we played all the time. We played regularly. We were good. We were really good. We had three-part harmonies. We had a fiddle player who just played hot fiddle. I was the lead guitarist, and we were very well known around the area. We had a following. We were trying to get to Nashville before the Dixie Chicks. Not that we could compete with them, but we were very, very popular. We played almost every night of the week during the band seasons, like from the spring through maybe the end of summer. During the regular part of the year, it was tough being a musician, but that's all I did for a while. And we had groupies. We had people. I still have a guitar strap that somebody made for me out of leather, and we had fun, but it was also very, very challenging. Those were the days where I was using a lot of drugs and alcohol, as were many of the people I engaged with in my life, and it made it a lot more difficult.
FYI, Three Penny Opera is a better name, a cooler name to me than Dixie Chicks. No offense to Dixie Chick fans, but I think Three Penny Opera is so intriguing because you guys can be anything from a rock band to a hip hop team. You can be anything. I guess I love that name. It could be a graffiti name too. I used to write graffiti, so that would be like one of the dopest names, like this to throw people off,
Well, if
especially
we
for
had
my
made it, we
sisters.
probably would have had to call ourselves 3PO because it was already a three penny opera.
Got it.
Bertolt Brecht was famous for that. But
Got it.
it was a cool time. I got to be a full time musician for a whole bunch of years and got it out of my system.
Well, I appreciate the fact that you were able to share with the world your gift and continue to share with the world with your gift. Hopefully one day, via since we have the YouTube now, we can play and have the world see you, in your glory, well, your continued glory of as a musician. But I think we're going to move forward. And what are our topics for today, Ronnie?
Well, we've been talking about this a lot this summertime. Why the summertime in our eyes is prime time for prevention, where we see a
Absolutely,
lot of
absolutely.
programs and coalitions taking the time off while the kids are out there. And we talk about that a lot. We thought we would talk about that as well as the end of summer blues and just the power of coalitions and what we're doing to extend that power. And that includes our NYC Pop Initiative. And, if we have time, maybe talking a little bit about the strategic prevention framework and what we like about it and whatever else comes to mind, because this is a conversation.
Absolutely, I love conversations. But and I probably maybe I said this in the past podcast, but I know I've said this offline a ton of times, and I know this is why we're talking about this topic about the summer. And when I first started with the PRC Prevention Resource Center last year, and it was early spring, and heading into the summer. I remember saying to Ronnie, I'm like I was like, yeah, summer's coming. What are we doing for the summer? Well, a lot of our coalitions don't do the work in the summer. And I was like curious, why. And I understand. And prior to the podcast, I had to think this thing through. And I had to run through my head why people wouldn't, do the work over the summer, especially when you have young people. I grew up in the hood. I grew up in Harlem, where this is the time we would get in the most trouble if we didn't have anything to do. Like
Hmm.
we would get in trouble, whether for me writing graffiti, some of my friends drinking or smoking, some of my friends even doing other criminal activities, or if not a friend or someone I knew of or heard of doing a criminal activity because we didn't have certain things to keep us occupied.
Hmm.
And I brought this to Ronnie and I said, Ronnie, like this is the time where our young people, if there's no job, if they don't get a job, they aren't on a sports team, they don't have an arts program, what are they going to
Exactly.
do? They're going to get in trouble because I know for a fact my arts program was tagging on the wall, which isn't a good thing. That was my art program, or playing basketball. That was the good thing. But
Hmm.
the negative part, granted, I'll defend graffiti artists, so shout out to graffiti artists. But the negative part was the writing graffiti for me. Was the what's the word I'm looking for? The defiance. Like as a teenager, you want to be defiant,
Of
and that's
course.
that's what I chose to do with my time when I didn't have anything else to do, but and back to coalitions, and I spoke to a few coalitions last year. I was new, so no one really cared what I said.
Well,
So
come on. That's not true, though, because a lot of times in this work, we're doing it for a long time and we
right,
get kind of jaded. And I don't even
understandable.
want to use the word jaded. We get kind of complacent. That's what I'm going to
Yes,
say.
better word. That's a much better word.
Because it's not jaded, because to be honest with you, I have more enthusiasm for this work as time goes on, especially when working with you has been so incredible for me.
Thank you.
You've just opened up so much. I mean, I didn't do a podcast before you. We didn't have some of the creative efforts that we're doing. Just it's easy to get stale. So when somebody comes in with fresh eyes like you did, it opens up my eyes. And we need that shaking up every once in a while because we get stale.
No, yeah, absolutely, and but again, like I said, it kind of struck me odd because of what was going on and how growing up in the inner city and what I've experienced, what I've seen, and what I know of. And this isn't an attack on the inner city because I'm an inner city kid, but I just knew we wanted something, but we didn't know how to go about getting that something. The something was hanging out with your friends to 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning and doing things you probably shouldn't be doing. Not saying
Exactly.
that our parents weren't involved. My mother was very involved, but I'm a teenage boy. You know, I mean, I'm a teenager. I don't want to say only boys, because young ladies also, but I was a teenager.
Of
We,
course.
we went out and we did teenage things, and I don't always fault teenagers for the things they do, but like I was saying earlier, I had to take a step back because I have to remember, part of it, one of the reasons why I think you explained to me, someone explained to me, is schools are closed,
Hmm.
right? In theory, schools are closed during the summer, so that's why some of the work stops. But I can challenge that by saying we have summer school, right?
Right.
I can challenge that by saying we have summer camp programs. I can challenge that, but now to this day, I do challenge that because I can say, because I've been here long enough, where I do say these are things that are going on. We have summer youth employment. This is a great time if a coalition wants to, or last year, involve summer youth employment program into their coalition, to have young people learn about coalition work. So those are all the ideas I had. Now this year, with COVID happening, I think it was a kick to the face to some of us, where it's like, wait a minute, what are our young people doing?
Right.
They took down and I think I did mention this in a previous podcast. They took down the basketball courts. There wasn't going to be summer youth employment at the time, program. Actually, it kind of came back, but it didn't come back. And there was so much going on where the young people in the neighborhoods that my mom lived in and I lived in, I would see, they weren't doing the things that I would normally see them doing.
Hmm.
I mean, granted, they probably were, getting high, smoking hookah and drinking, but they weren't doing it so upfront, so out in the open. Like, there's no basketball courts, there's no baseball fields, everything's shut down. I understand we needed social distancing, but what could we do to support these young people? I think we could have done, as a society, done a better job to look around, like, what, we didn't prepare. We kept hearing, oh, this is a passing thing. We should always prepare. You prepare like it's going to be here forever. Because
That's
right
right.
now, it feels like it's going to be here forever.
I know every time we take, like, 2 steps forward, we take 3 steps back. And thing is, this is not going away so quickly. And I know
Absolutely.
we're all anxious to jump in there. And I guess a lot of times what really gets me down is that I hear people saying, or, I'm on social media a lot, or I read people's posts that talk about them not believing it or just not taking it seriously. And I've asked people, have you lost anybody to this virus? Do you know anybody with this virus? And I never get a response.
Absolutely.
I don't know, once you've known somebody or people, I mean, we've watched as New York City, Long Island, New York State, especially the city and the island, were decimated. This is serious. Sharon Stone just put a video out in the last day or two. Her sister is very sick. I think she lost another family member, and her brother-in-law sick there, and she just is beside herself with emotion. And she just talked very openly and emotionally and honestly, and said, when you don't wear a mask, this is what happens to people. And um, it just saddens me that we often don't care enough to be able to say, hey, I may not like having to do this, but I'm going to do it because I care about you. And,
And that even ties back into what we're talking about with our young people. Like, I always hear, you young people don't care, but but we do care. We want you guys to care. We want our elder states people to care. And this year, like I was saying, like, the boot to the face was like, you're right, Chevar. What are we gonna do for these kids? Like, what are we gonna do for these young people? Like, you're right. When I was a teenager, I did these things. Like, hearing people say that, yes, I did these things. I'm like, I wasn't making it up. Things don't just happen overnight. like,
mm-hmm,
like, hearing that, but also
mm-hmm,
what I was stating earlier is, I had to think about the individual also, like the coalitions. They have lives themselves also.
right.
You know, they have families themselves. They have their own goals and aspirations. And I think that's part of what we're going to talk about during the evaluation piece. Like, how do you bring those things together for yourself and for your coalition?
Mm-hmm. You're right. Exactly. And it's hard to get people to commit to coming to it. Like during the winter, when people are looking for things to do or they're indoors and they can be looking up data, they'll do it more often. But when it's summer and they want to be outside and they want to be vacationing, it's hard to get them to come to the table.
I
But
totally get it.
we had the perfect venue this year. just, we've seen such great attendance in our coalition meetings
Hmm.
because of Zoom and other, and other platforms, not just Zoom, but whatever people are using. And I think that what we're going to see in the future, I'm trying to envision, like, what is a coalition meeting going to look like? What is one of our trainings going to look like? And I realized we got to be able to do both now. Doing one is not going to be enough. When we go back to in person,
Absolutely.
I think we start to utilize the virtual world as well and make it so that everybody can be there. When we did a training at Katka. Remember how many people were there? 148 people.
148. That's insane.
Now, if we were doing this in a physical location, we would have had 30.
This is so true. Oh, I can't find parking, or this some excuse comes up.
And we'd be worrying about what people were going to eat.
Yes, 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 yes. Definitely. You definitely bring up a good point about the world, and I know we're definitely, some of us are definitely zoomed out, and we use Zoom as a new adjective to explain
Hmm.
this virtual video conferencing. That might end up being in a dictionary in another year or so.
Oh, it
but
definitely will be. So what do you find? Like, I get Zoom fatigue. I mean, I had a couple of days where I was getting, I'm prone to aura headaches. And I started to realize I'd spent so much time, online in the virtual world that it was messing with my head.
No, I agree with you, and I spent so much time, doing this, and I had to think again. I had to also think back to my past, because I did more photography in the past, and I used to design clothes, and how much time I spent on my laptop and so forth. But I don't think I spent as much time on my laptop as I do now. Like my work, this is my work. This is my day. Like
Hmm.
whether it's email or editing the podcast or YouTube or a training or a conference, or is this I'm here. Like I even like sometimes, like I even eat my lunch at my computer, my laptop, and check
Yeah.
my email when I shouldn't, because because at one point
Hmm.
I would tell Ronnie, like, I didn't take lunch today, or I forgot to punch out, like, because you get so engulfed in what you're doing, and we've talked about this in meetings outside of this, where it's like we don't have that time to debrief with ourselves, because
Hmm.
once we end
Hmm.
this thing,
Right.
we go on to the next thing, and
Right. I mean, just if we look at our schedule, usually, okay, we were in one meeting this morning, and then we have a completely different meeting an hour later, and then we're doing the podcast later. This for us is relaxation, though, because
no,
this is the best
absolutely,
part. Um,
absolutely.
well, let's talk about NYC Pop. I'm so excited about what's going on with NYC Pop. For those who don't know, it's New York City Partners of Prevention. Um, and how would you describe NYC Pop?
NYC Pop, it
Mhm.
all started from an idea from two of our coalitions in the Bronx, who came to us and said, we want to do something COVID related. Is that a guess? But I'm going to keep talking like I always do.
We always catch you in the middle. Um, but yes, we have a guest. Oh my
so,
God.
so
Go
it
ahead. Once
was,
you finish, and I'll
of
let her in a
course,
second.
it's COVID related. They wanted to do a COVID related slash um, prevention type of a campaign. So it's all right, cool. Why don't we invite other coalitions to participate in this, and we will see what comes from it. It wasn't called NYC Pop at the time, but we got all these different coalitions together, and it became this bigger than life thing. I mean, for me at least, where it seemed to me like this is a great tool or great avenue for our coalitions to network with one another,
Mm-hmm.
to share their talents with one another, to figure out, what, this is what it means to develop a campaign, to do some research, to learn how to create Canva images or Spark images, to be an advertiser, to be an actual business,
Mm-hmm.
like, use a business model within the confines of a coalition, which I thought was super cool. Meeting some of us met, depending on what committees you were in, 3 times a week.
I know. I hate to interrupt you, but I don't want to be rude to our guest.
Oh man, I want to keep going, but let's do this. Let's bring her
Well, we're
in.
going to talk about this stuff a lot. All right. Let's see who showed up today at our door. I clicked on the admit, but I didn't see anything happen. Uh-oh. I hope we haven't lost her. Well, you can keep talking about NYC Pop. I have a text. Oh, here she is. Okay. She's here now and she's connecting. Um,
So yeah,
it's funny. I feel like sometimes, remember Pee Wee Herman used to have somebody come to the door?
I love the Pee Wee Herman's Playhouse. I love that show.
And right now we have Jen joining us. And there she is. Hey, Jen.
Hey, Jen.
Hello. How
Before
are
we
you
get
guys?
before we get started, I want to say something to you, Jen. You have one of the coolest smiles in the world. Like when you smile, like you brighten up. You are so bright. Like you
Aw.
like you have those cheeks that the auntie grabs and pinches.
That I do. That I do. I certainly do.
Well,
Well, how are you guys?
we're
Thank
good
you.
and we're so excited you're here. So rather than us going to introduce you, why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name is Jennifer Ocasio, and I am the coordinator of the Mid-Hudson Prevention Resource Center, located just a little bit north of you guys. We cover the 7 counties of the Mid-Hudson region. So we go all the way up to Sullivan, Ulster, Dutchess area, where there's more people than cows, all the way down to Rockland and Westchester, which is more similar to what you guys see. And like Ronnie and Chevar, we offer the same services. So we work with our community coalitions, we work with our prevention providers, really just trying to build the coalitions and the community support for substance abuse prevention.
That says it all in a nutshell. Now you have a lot of coalitions though.
We do. We actually, we have one of the counties. So one of our counties is Westchester County. At one point in time had the most DFC funded coalitions in the nation.
That's incredible.
So we
Wow.
have, so Westchester is a wild, wild place when it comes to prevention and coalition stuff. A lot of those coalitions have started to age out. I apologize for the phone ringing in the background. I might be one of the
I think we're losing a little bit of your connection there. Are you experiencing that, Chevar, or
out
just
of
on
the
my end?
DFC, so they're no
Yeah.
longer funded. Oh, hold on. I'm gonna turn off my camera because my internet is being a little funky.
Okay, not a problem.
There we go.
But that's a nice picture.
Thank you very much. That was a person who was a part-time photographer, worked for ADAC for a while, and she did all our staff photos. That picture's got to be close to 10 years old, but I refuse to get rid of it.
You look the same. Come on.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. A little grayer, a little more gray, but that's all right.
Well, I understand that.
I'm letting it come in natural. So, however it comes in, it comes in. But so we're dealing with a lot of coalitions that had funding for a period of time and are now without funding and trying to kind of figure out how to do that stuff. So Westchester is a really fun place to work. And then we have other counties, like up in the northern part where, Sullivan County only has one coalition. So we certainly have a big variety. I would say that we have a total of coalitions that we work with on a truly regular basis, I would say is probably around 25.
Wow. That's a
Yeah,
lot of
it's a lot.
coalitions. Yeah. We had 17, but 2 have taken a break for a while. So, and we just started with a new, we have about 16. When I started in 2014, we had 4. So we
I was
really
going to
seen
say,
them grow.
yeah, you have done some amazing work down there in the city. And I know from sort of bordering you guys, how difficult and different things are down there. Up in our region, most of our coalitions are school based, or they at least base their catchment area on a school district. So we have some that span 3 counties, because that's how big their school district actually is. And so I know for you guys, it's very different. The same school district structure as we do up here. And so I know that that's been a real struggle, and I'm so happy to hear that you guys are up to 16. That's amazing.
Yeah, it blows my mind. I mean, of course, the colleges, 5 of our city universities were funded by the Office of Addiction Services and Support, OASIS, for a
Yeah.
5-year grant, and that has definitely helped. But what you talked about is something that I think every coalition goes through. You know, you get your funding, some get the drug-free communities or DFC funding, maybe they get 10 years out of that, then what do you do? It's really hard to sustain the
Exactly.
work once the funding leaves. You know, and I think that's one of the big
Yeah, and
challenges.
absolutely. And we have found that there's a couple of outliers, and we find that coalitions that have a really strong grassroots base to start with tend to do
Yeah.
better once they've sort of exited that funding stage, because they sort of have some of that experience. And
Yes.
really it comes down to that community support. Really having that community support is what's so important. And without those volunteers, that's really when we see the coalition struggle. So
Hmm.
it really comes down to who is committed to the community.
Now, during this whole time, I mean, we were talking earlier just about how our work has changed over the last 6 months. Like, how have you been
Mhm.
keeping up the work, and how have your coalitions been keeping up the work during the quarantine, and even with, you know, slowly going back to in person, with most not? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so it's actually interesting. This is one of the areas where we have found that the funded coalitions really kept rolling. Mostly because they were required to, right? There was somebody back there
Right.
checking on them saying, hey, what are you doing right now? A lot of our unfunded coalitions, or even what I like to call underfunded coalitions, which are coalitions that have a little pot of money, but not really enough to like sustain like an employee or anything. A lot of them took a break. A lot of them took some time to sort of regroup. We still have a handful, about 3 or 4 coalitions that have just really said, we can't right now. It's not, we're not there. And they are the smaller ones. They are
Hmm.
the ones who were newer, who didn't really have a true, let's say, real calendar going in terms of scheduled meetings and stuff like that. They were a little more ad hoc. And so those coalitions, we found that a lot of those community members had to take a step back. So those coalitions really have sort of put themselves on pause. Not that we've stopped talking to them, because we haven't, but they've stopped meeting. So the funding definitely helped to keep some people going.
Yeah.
But it's just, yeah, it's very interesting. The Zoom thing, woohoo. The Zoom meetings have definitely taken on a life of their own, which is in some ways super great, right? So one of the things that we've always struggled with our coalitions is getting attendance at meetings. And a lot of our coalitions struggle with that because of the size of their catchment area. You
Hmm.
know, when you have a catchment area that's, 30-45 minutes one way to the other, and that's without traffic, although there isn't much traffic up there. um, you tend to have people who are like, I don't really want to drive, so I don't want to come. And so those coalitions have always struggled with getting people there. And now this digital format has opened up a world of people who are like, hey, I never could make it before because I couldn't squeeze in the drive,
Right.
but now I can. um, so the Zoom thing has definitely been going great, but there's really that, I think our coalitions are still struggling with that human connection,
Hmm.
which is, I think, the part that, if you think about it, those of us who got involved in this in some way, typically we love and crave that human connection, that human emotion attached to this work. And so a lot of coalitions are feeling that stress. um,
Yes.
and we're just trying to keep working through it with them, right? Like, you know
Yeah, I mean, we're amazed at how busy we are, because we're seeing a lot more people attending the meetings, and we're able to do a lot more technical assistance sessions. And it's just,
Absolutely.
we're staying busy. But we have our other initiatives too, that we're working on
Mhm.
with the coalitions. If
Yeah.
you were going to speak to somebody who was starting out in this, because we have people who are just starting to get their coalitions together, or they've been trying for a while and they've hit a wall, like, what advice would you give them? Someone who's just trying to get this going. Because I like to let people know what they're in for.
Yeah. What advice would I give someone who's just starting out? I'd say, remember, It is a marathon and not a sprint. I think that is probably one of the biggest piece of advice that I can give somebody, because so many times people come into this field and they want to make a change, and which is fantastic, and we love the passion, but a lot of times the passion doesn't last long enough for the process. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to remember that things like community development, community change, environmental change, they take years. They take time to build roots. It's like a tree, right? You don't just plant the tree and walk away. You have to nurture it and water it. And so I look at it as really trying to remember that it is a marathon and not.
I think that's great advice, actually. And I always say to people, I'm famous, not anywhere beyond our circles, but within our circles, we're saying it takes at least 3 to 5 years for a coalition to get,
Yes.
entrenched in a community. I see so many groups who want it to be like immediate, and they want to like have a year's worth or 6 months worth, and they're going to apply for a big federal grant. And I've known a couple that have gotten it, but when people get it so early, they're just not ready. The infrastructure's not there.
I completely agree with you on that, Ronnie. And that is where we see at the end of the 5 years, and if they happen to get to 10, refunded to 10, at the end of the 10 years, that's where we really see a lot of those coalitions falter and fall apart, because there wasn't that community glue holding them together to start with. It was about getting the funding. And so, yes, I agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that I wrote that down. Passion doesn't last longer than the process. I think that's one of the coolest things. I'm gonna start using that. I might tattoo that on my forehead. Probably not. But
maybe on your arm.
but you said a few things that kind of stuck out to me. One, grassroots. I think people need to understand what grassroots means. And also the marathon. Well, you said a lot of things. Marathon. It's not a marathon. It's a marathon, not a race. People need to understand what constitutes a marathon. That long stretch and what falls into those things. And also, one thing that I always talk about, what I mentioned, and I've seen this. People they'll get a grant, but they don't know how to budget and allocate money to certain things, because they have this lump sum of money, and I don't want to use the wrong term. So how to spend it and how to sustain it.
Yeah.
How to say we have this money, but we aren't going to use it. We're going to use it like we don't have it. If that makes sense.
Yes, it absolutely does, Chevar. Absolutely. I agree with you. I think a lot of people get that. It's like they see dollar signs. Mm-hmm. They get that 125 and they're like, woohoo, we can pay a creator all of this money and attract this super high end, staff person or evaluator or something. And then they sit down and they're like, okay, now we're left with this little pot of, like, well, wait a second, let's take a step back and think, what have we already started doing? Right? I always think of it like a budget with a family. What are we already doing that saves money? What can we continue? Yes. So I think you're right, Chevar. I think a lot of people end up with this like, wow, and then they don't know how to allocate properly, or they don't know that how much those things that you need to do at the community level really cost. I think that's another thing, Ronnie, I think I would go back to and add to that is, you would be surprised at how much speakers cost as in terms of presenters. Mm-hmm. To get somebody to come and build that sort of rah type of feeling within your community, to pay a speaker to do that can cost so much money. And what do you have in your back pocket that you can already pull out?
And
so,
you mentioned,
Chevar, you're right. Yeah.
What you just said about that rah person, and that's something people don't always know they need either a champion or as many champions as possible. Without that champion, and then one champion it's tough to make a go with, but you got to have at least one. I've seen groups get together and nobody's a real champion. You've got to build those champions, but it's interesting because I ran coalitions when I was in Portland, Maine at Public Health, and every year we would apply for certain grants and we didn't get them most of the time, but we'd always institute at least one of the things in the grant, because we felt once we get funded, we'll already have that built up. And we
I
wound up
love that.
getting funded by the state after like 3 or 4 years. They started to fund one of my programs. It was the Overdose Prevention Project, and then they replicated them around the state, and we became a line item in the budget. But by the time we got funded, we were already up and running. It's like we didn't wait to get funded. And there are certain things that
Yeah.
groups can do because they have the partnerships, and those partnerships can, create those resources. And we don't necessarily need the funds to get it going, I guess was my point.
Yes.
It's those relationships. And once you build those, you could start to institutionalize things. I mean, we actually started, it wasn't life skills training, it was reconnecting youth, which is not used as much anymore,
Yes.
but it was very popular at the time. And 2 or 3 of the high schools that we were sponsoring, they incorporated it into the school after a couple of years. And they started to
Wow.
offer it as part of their program. And then we were able to let it go. Because it's not up to coalition to run everything. It's to get those seeds planted and maybe water it, nurture it, and get it to where it can grow on its own.
Exactly. That's what sustainability is. That's
Mm-hmm.
what this process is about, right? Is making it better so it can continue to get better as it goes along. That's amazing. I think you're 100% right on that one, Ronnie.
I hope so. but the bottom line is we know there's never enough money invested in prevention. And
No.
I think a lot of times I point this out, prevention, for every dollar that we spend on prevention, studies have shown that an average of $10 is saved for every dollar on consequences down the road. It's so much more cost effective on a human level and on a monetary level to invest in prevention. It's just we don't see the
Yeah,
results right away.
absolutely.
So people get
Yeah.
impatient and they run the other way.
Absolutely, you're right. It's so hard to measure prevention because how do you say something didn't happen? And it's just it's such a struggle. And I know we struggle with that at our level in terms of tracking what we do and how we're helping the communities. But I think that coalitions and communities also struggle with that as well, because you get to a point you're like, okay, we're doing these things and our numbers are down. I'm always, Ronnie, like you, I'm famous only in our circles for saying things like, you know, once we get underage drinking below whatever arbitrary number it may be, let's say 25%, does that mean we're done? Like, are we just going to say, okay, we did it, now move on to the next thing? And when you say it like that, a lot of times people go, well, no, that doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, you're right, it doesn't. But that's what we do in this country and in our funding systems. We look at a problem and we say, okay, this is our problem. And as soon as we see that problem go away, I'm using air quotes in that moment. Once we see that problem dissipate to what we consider to be an acceptable level, then all of a sudden, okay, now that's not a problem anymore. Let's go focus on something else. And when we're constantly shifting our focus, those other substances come back. It's not, community change isn't like do it once and you're done, set it and forget it. What was that? Wasn't that I think I'm showing my age here. I think that's like a 1980s or 1990s slogan from something.
That's from
Set it and forget it.
Some infomercial, like a 2 o'clock in the
Yeah.
morning infomercial.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. But that's not what a community is. A community, you can't just set it and forget it with a community. You have to keep checking on it. You have to keep working on it. So I agree with you that just so we get going and we're like, okay, now we're done. Next thing, and it's not. You have to keep coming back to it and checking on it.
So will we say that sometimes we're too ambitious in our goals, or you just laughed at me?
No, she's laughing with you.
I know.
I'm laughing with you.
I definitely know. I'm joking, because I've been here with the PRC for a year and probably 5 months now, and in our bringing this up about the grants, what have you, and these grandiose ideas that our coalitions look forward to. And I think part of it is teaching ourselves and everyone else how to have small, obtainable goals for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And where the sprint and marathon analogy really comes into play, because what are you going to do if you want to run a marathon, right? You're going to train. And goals for yourself. And that's where we can keep, I think the best way to keep coalitions rolling is to help them find those little goals, that baby steps, as I like to call them, and celebrate them when you achieve them. So that's, I mean, Chevar, that's just perfect.
I think the other part is having them believing those small goals mean something.
Yes. Yep. And that's where, this is another thing I'm kind of famous. That's where your logic model comes in. That's where when you actually sit down and write out the plan beforehand, that's where you can see those baby steps and you can really say, okay, look, I always talk about it like losing weight. If you want to lose 50 pounds, you're not going to try to lose 50 pounds. You're going to try to lose 2 to 5 pounds, right? And then, so how can we set those poundage markers with coalitions? I think is a great thing that we do.
Yeah, I mean, such a great point. I'm in long-term recovery, as you know, and when I got into recovery, I didn't say I'm going to not use drugs or alcohol for the rest of my life. I said I'm going to try to not use them today.
Exactly.
And just it's progress, not perfection. And I think when we're realistic and we understand our goals and we set reachable goals, you don't want to set that bar too low, but you don't want to set it too high either, because success feels different ways. And as people, we need to have those, those things that we can reach for and grab, and not make it so far away that we can't get them.
Right. And I think that's a great thing about, that's where the community comes in, right? Because for community, a baby step may be meeting with the mayor, right? Whereas another community, a baby step may be getting a program into a school. Like, baby steps look different, right, to different people. If you're going to try to lose 50 pounds, your baby steps are different than if you're trying to lose 10. So I think making sure that we have that community voice to say, this is what we recognize as baby steps. This is what we would like to celebrate as short-term goals. I think that's super important to have their feedback on that, because they're the ones who need to feel that reward.
I also think goal setting should be looked at in different, depending on your neighborhoods or areas you work in, because you mentioned something about having the mayor at a meeting or meeting the mayor. I mean, we live in New York City where that's yeah. So I think looking at our goals should be different. Looking at our areas, and also the population is different. Like we have neighborhoods that sometimes are larger than some towns.
Absolutely.
We have zip codes.
We have zip codes.
Right.
Absolutely.
I think that's something that we have to look at when we're talking to our evaluators, or our evaluators are talking to us, or to whomever creates these practices. Like, they're all different. We have to understand that what happens there isn't going to happen here. What happens here isn't going to happen there.
Exactly.
It's different. I think that's something. There has to be ways to look at it and understand that, all right, this town can get the mayor, but guess what? You're going to get the block association leader, and that's your mayor.
Yes.
That's a
absolutely.
Great analogy. Yeah.
That is fantastic. And Chevar, you're right. And that's because every single community looks different. I mean, even up where I live. So where I grew up, you guys are going to laugh at this. So the village that I grew up in was, and I didn't grow up in the village, I grew up outside of the village, 5 square miles with one single stoplight. The second stoplight got put in while I was in high school, and I graduated in 2000. So, the mayor, I still actually live in the town, but our current mayor was a high school teacher of mine, right? That's a really easy person for me to get to a meeting, right? Whereas I could go to a city like Newburgh, for example. Newburgh's one of our cities in Orange County that has had some serious historic trauma incidences and things like that. That's a community that, you're not going to get the mayor at the table unless, well, the current mayor, yes, you may get Torrance Harvey at the table, but some of the past mayors, you wouldn't have necessarily got them at the table unless you had an urgent thing to talk to them about. They were too into reactivity. And so you know, if when you're looking at those goals for Newburgh, it's the same thing. Their goal was never to get politicians at the table, because for the most part, the politicians were already there, right? Anybody who's trying to be elected in that city is at the table. But what they really need are the community residents, right? So there's a coalition where when you start looking at sectors, they've got all of these sectors, right? They've got all of these representatives from all these different parts of the community, but what they're really lacking is that community voice at times. So they now have a separate group, a community group called We Are Newburgh, that helps feed the coalition that community voice. But that's something that they've struggled with for years, because they're so untrusting of anybody who's associated with the county or the city or this or state or government association, you know.
That's so fascinating, the different models. That's why
it really is.
That's one thing I try to impress upon groups that I speak with, and people on different levels, that not every community will have the same model, and we need to give people that flexibility so that they can come up with a viable system that works for them. Well, we're getting to that point where we only have a few minutes left, but I always like to ask this question, and it veers us away from what we're talking about, but maybe it won't with you. What did you want to be when you were growing up?
I wanted to be a mom.
All right.
I didn't really have business or college goals in life. I was really very much, I wanted to have kids. I wanted to be a mom. I ended up with a biology major, graduated with a biology degree. So I head for science, but yeah, that's what I want.
Well, cool, because then you realize your goals. It's so often, but you wind up with a degree in biology, and you're doing this work. I have a degree in English.
Yes.
I think the best scientists in the world are moms.
Oh, well, thank you, Chevar. I agree with that. It's funny because everybody always wants to know how did you get into prevention? And I always say I tripped and fell into it.
Well, we're glad
I started as a secretary, and here I am. I tripped and fell into prevention. So, and I say that because I feel like a lot of people, they end up in that. Well, I didn't know this was a job growing up. So, yeah.
I do want to mention, you gave me an idea. Maybe we can pitch this around at maybe some sort of a meeting, what have you. And I hate the name of the show, and I'm gonna use the name of the show. Remember the show Wife Swap? I hate the title. But we should do like a coalition swap. Like, a city coalition with a suburban coalition, and they swap, and they see what it looks like, and they run their meetings, and they meet whomever's there just to see the differences.
Oh my gosh, Chevar, I love it. I love it. I think that is something that Ronnie and I are going to have to talk to the other directors about and see what we can set up. That sounds to me like an amazing networking event, doesn't it, Ronnie?
It does. And, I'm already sitting here as he's saying it, and I'm like envisioning it in my head. I'm like, okay, well, right now we have to do it virtually, but why not at this point buddy up coalitions around the state to sit in with other coalitions in other areas so they can kind of understand each other better.
I think it's an amazing idea.
We will definitely talk about this one. But
we're gonna have to. Yes.
Thank you for joining us today. It's never enough time to talk, because I love talking to you, and hopefully you'll come back and see us again.
I absolutely will. I'm gonna try to turn my camera on for a quick second so you guys can say goodbye. I'm sorry I was a little late. I'm so excited to be here, and it was a day. That's all I'm gonna say.
We totally get it. Listen, you take care, and I'm sure we'll see you very soon again, like in the next few days or a week. I'm sure I'm gonna see you in like 5 minutes. All right, you take care. Thanks again, Jen.
All right, bye guys. Thank you
so
much.
Well, that was great.
No, it was fun. She's amazing. I love her smile.
And just she has so many great ideas, and that's what's so much fun about this. We talk to different people from different groups in prevention, and every one of them has a different slant on how they do it.
Right. Again, not only do I love her smile, I love her energy, I love her knowledge. Like she seems like a really happy person. Like she talks with a smile.
Hmm.
She talks with energy. She talks like she galvanizes her group, her team, her coalition. So I love talking to her. I love hearing her talking because of this the energy and the positivity that comes out of it. Even when she says something negative, it still sounds so positive.
Well, you know what? You need that to be in this field because it's easy to get discouraged, like we've said so often, because you don't see the results right away. But we set those smaller goals. We see what our people are doing, what coalitions are doing in their process, just in engaging in the relationships, and it just energizes us. But I'm afraid we're running out of time.
I guess thank you everyone for listening and watching our podcast. You can reach us at Prevention NYC. Did I say that correct? On Twitter, on Instagram is NYC _ PRC. But you'll hear it all later, and it'll be in the description. But thank you guys.
Yeah, and please feel free to put things into the comments, and there's a button below us. It'll say subscribe. Please subscribe to our podcast. Get your friends to do it. We want to carry the message of prevention. So we thank you for listening, for watching. This was the solution. Nothing changes if we change nothing.